Hi there, John Moore here, and I am a shamanic teacher from the state of Maine in the US. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about death and shamanism, and specifically how shamanic practitioners, shamanic people handle and deal with death, and what happens when you die, and what do we experience when people die, and all of those sorts of things. I'll start by saying that shamanism, because it is universal, it's a universal human set of views and practices, that it always looks through a cultural lens. So shamanic people in Africa or Australia or North America or South America or Europe or wherever, they're always going to have a little bit of a different cultural take on things, meaning they are going to talk to they're going to have different names for things. They're going to have different um, ideas about the afterlife and that sort of thing. So I'm going to try to boil it down in very basic, non-cultural terms and not put a lot of cultural overlay on that. But culture plays a really, really important part in what happens to us after we die. And I will get to that. So, afterlife might be heaven or hell if you grew up here, or it might be going west, or it might be this, or it might be that, or it might be going with your ancestors, or da 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 da. One thing I will say that there's this word psychopomp. If you haven't heard of that word before, it is the psychopomp is the guide of souls. It's a Greek word, psycho meaning spirit, and pomp, I guess, meaning guide or tour guide or what have you. Um, but this is a person that helps shuttle souls to the other side. And that's a role that shamans have played in almost all cultures forever, for as long as we know and well before we know, probably. So what happens if you train in shamanism, if you go through shamanic apprenticeship and initiation and all that sort of thing, a really important part of shamanic learning, and you can't skip this even if you really, really want to, is death and dying work. And by death and dying work, I mean you learn to work with people who are in the process of dying. You learn to work with people who have died, who are stuck in the middle world, which we might refer to as ghosts, or that sort of thing. And you also learn to work with people who are grieving the loss of somebody. So this is a super important role. Not all practitioners really do this kind of work, but you have to. Your training is incomplete if you haven't gone through this, if you haven't done this, if you haven't done psychopomp work, if you haven't gone to where you're going to go when you die. So a really important part of my training, and something that really kind of lifted the fear of death for me. It's not that I go out and take risks and want to die or anything like that, but I don't fear what's going to happen to me after I die. Is that in Journey we go to the place that we go to a likely place that we're going to go to when we die, and we realize that it's actually really pleasant and nice and wonderful. I'll start by saying, and I'm sorry if this offends anybody's religious sensibilities, but the Christian idea of hell, I have never experienced that. And I have worked with spirits who were murderers on this side of the thing. I have helped cross them over, and they have not gone to a fiery pit where they are tortured for all eternity. And honestly, I do not think a loving God, if you believe in such a thing, would allow something like that to exist. If you believe in that, it's fine. But I'm going to talk about belief and how that affects our afterlife in a moment, because it's really important. I do think that it's a bit of propaganda that was used to control people. The word hell comes from the Norse, and it was just the underworld where people went when they died. It wasn't a place of torture. It was just where you went, unless you died in battle and were taken to Valhalla, or I forget the other, Freya. We think of Valhalla, where Odin took people, but Freya actually got the first choice of souls that she took to her hall. And because we're so patriarchal, I can't even remember the name of Freya's hall. But she got first choice, and Odin got the leftovers. So put that in your patriarchal pipe and smoke it. But so anyway, so Norse belief hell, and then we took that word, and so what happened a lot of times when Christianity came in and stamped out the local pagan populations and forced them into Christianity at the point of the sword, they turned everything that was pagan into devil worship. They turned hell, the afterlife where your pagan ancestors went into a fiery pit where they were tortured. All of these things, it was just propaganda. It was just a way to get people to do what they wanted, which was to, become part of their religion. And this is not a stab at people who believe or practice Christianity today, but this is historical truth. This is what happened. Particularly when the Romans came into area, the Roman Christians came into areas. We see it happening in Greece, where the Temple of Eleusis was, shut down after almost 2,000 years of practice, and pagan temples were demolished and pagan codexes were burned, and just this sort of genocidal wipeout of non-Christian belief. So that happened, and so hell got turned into this fiery pit. I've done a lot of psychopomp work over the years. I've never experienced that. I've never crossed somebody over to a place where they were going that was torturous. But people have a lot of belief about that because we are steeped in this culture. We're steeped in, our TV shows show the devil in a certain way, and fiery pits and all this stuff, and it goes back to, goes back a couple thousand years. Anyway, so what happens? What happens when you die? From my perspective, and I will say that your cultural beliefs strongly affects what happened to you after you die. How could that be? Well, because dying, the soul isn't just a physical thing where, like, okay, gravity is a law and I pour water and it falls down in the glass. The soul carries your life experience, which includes your cultural beliefs, includes things that are impressed upon you. And so when it separates from your body, as it does in death completely, uh, you know, it still holds your personality. It still holds, at least for a while, your ego, all of these things, your traumas, your pain, that starts to get stripped away very soon after you die. But normally, and you know, where you go to is, because it is non-physical, is shaped by what you believe in. This is my experience anyway. And again, if you have a different experience, if you come from a different tradition or different culture, I fully respect that. And I know that I'm only giving you one person's experience of the afterlife, but hopefully this will ring, some parts of this will ring true and make a lot of sense for you. So when you die, your soul, your energy body is, goes away. Your etheric body, the energy disperses. Your soul is sort of like, this is no longer a safe place for me to be, and leaves your body because your body is dying. And what I have found is that the soul sticks around for usually several days, usually about 3 days to a week. There's it's interesting that there are traditions around this in different cultures. I've been to funerals in the Philippines, for example, where people sit vigil with the body of the deceased loved one for a number of days. There's a specific mourning period, which is a year long. There's sitting Shiva in the Jewish faith, which is, I believe, 7 days. And so there are these traditions all over the world that seem to be relatively universal about wakes and sitting Shiva and hanging out anyway. There are there are cultures where they bury the body like immediately, and we're sanitary reasons for that, right? Dead bodies weren't preserved back then, and couldn't there was no refrigeration, there was no embalming, there was no this or that, so they could carry disease. And so there were definitely sanitary reasons for doing that. However, in my experience, and I can't even count the number of times that people have come to me and said, oh, my grandfather passed away and I saw him, or I dreamed about him, or he did this and something showed up in my house, or this and that and this and that. So what I have experienced is that when people die, generally they stick around at least for a few days. The soul, the spirit body, sticks around for a few days and kind of looks in on loved ones. If they don't have any loved ones, I'm not sure what happens. I don't usually work directly with people who don't have any loved ones unless it's a stuck spirit. I'll talk about stuck spirits or ghosts in a moment. At a certain point, people cross over. They go to another place. They go to another realm. You could call it heaven or the afterlife or whatever words you want to put on it. Words don't adequately describe it. So they pass through this layer of void, which sounds scary but is actually really cool. It is the womb of creation, or the cradle of creation. It is a space of emptiness, which sounds awful, but if you can imagine a place where there's no pain or suffering or anything, it's actually quite amazing. And then they go through to another realm, and that realm is usually full of loved ones who've passed, other spirits who are all happy to see you, and certain spirits that I have encountered have figured out that you can really shape it's essentially an astral plane. They can really shape the environment to be whatever they want. So for example, I did work for somebody who just wanted me, said, I want you to check in on my aunt who passed away. And I journeyed for her, and I saw her, this older woman who I could describe, and she was painting a sunset. And she told me some things, and I came back and she goes, oh my gosh, my aunt was a painter, and she looked just as you described. And I said, well, your aunt's figured out that if she wants to paint a sunset in the afterlife, all she has to do is intend it, and the sunset will kind of stay in place for her for as long as she needs to paint it. Where before, when she was painting, like obviously the sun was setting and she couldn't paint fast enough to get a sunset in ordinary reality. So it was kind of a nice thing, that, and I saw that she was visiting with this person's grandmother who had passed, and they were doing, they were visiting together, and it was really kind of a beautiful thing. And that has been the totality of my experience with psychopomp work. When people cross over, they actually experience really pleasant, wonderful, welcoming, loving conditions. So let's talk about reincarnation a little bit. So souls do reincarnate. I believe in reincarnation, or I'll joke sometimes and say I don't believe in reincarnation, but I did in a past life. But I do believe in reincarnation. I believe that we all have come from somewhere. We all have been reincarnated, maybe multiple times, and we are our own ancestors. Some people do not. Some people stay where they are. Some people cross over. Some people stay for a while and then reincarnate. They have things they want to experience in a physical body. There's lots of reasons for reincarnation to happen. And so that part of us that, that there's an undying part of us, there's an undying, unborn part of us, which is a spark of divinity that really is at the core of who we are, that just sort of shines in a different direction and comes through a new body. And sometimes that carries with it some of our soul body memories and that sort of thing, but not fully, because that's why we can't always completely access them. We don't always, unless you're the Buddha or the Dalai Lama or something, you can't fully remember all of your past lives. You can do work to go back and get some information from there. And sometimes we have past life returns where things come up for me. And I remember when I was quite young, in my early 20s, I was training in martial arts, and my teacher brought me to train with these teachers who had come in from Japan. They were giving a big expo that night, and they allowed us to come and train with them in Boston. They had all flown in from the Budokan in Tokyo. It was really cool. I mean, these guys were amazing. There were Zen archers and sumo wrestlers and Aikido guys and karate guys and all kinds of stuff. And I decided I want to go train with the sword guys because I hadn't done sword work before, but I always thought it was cool. I watched the movie The Highlander when I was a kid and all of that stuff, and Star Wars. And so there was a teacher there, a really older gentleman who only spoke Japanese, and he had a student who was translating for him and spoke English. And I came onto the mat, and he handed me a bamboo sword, which is called a shinai, which is what they practice with. And I just held it in a way that felt really natural to me. And all of a sudden, the teacher starts speaking furious Japanese, and I don't speak Japanese. And his assistant came over and says to me, he goes, the sensei means teacher, the sensei wants to know where you learned how to hold a sword. And I said, I didn't. I've never trained with a sword before. He goes, you're holding it exactly right, and it usually takes people a really long time to get the hand placement correctly on the sword. And I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And there were some things that sort of over time and through exploration and that sort of thing that led me to believe that I was pulling on some skills that I had from previous life. And so there are people who are like that. There, people who are virtuoso musicians who, they practice a whole lot, but they also seem to have this inborn talent for things. Artists and people who have different ways of thinking, philosophical ways of thinking that sometimes seem to come out of nowhere. And I realize that virtuoso musicians and artists and people like that practice a whole bunch. It's not like I was gonna pick up a sword and do a sparring match with the grandmaster. That wasn't gonna happen. But there were things that were coming through for me that apparently were challenging to know otherwise, or I didn't have a way of knowing them. And I just did something that felt right. And so I call those past life returns. I work with a lot of people who are going through stuff like that as well. So let's talk about stock spirits or ghosts for a moment. So what happens is there are certain conditions that when somebody dies, sometimes their soul sticks around. And when I say somebody, I mean human beings. This doesn't really seem to happen with animals in my experience. Maybe there are ghost dogs or horses or what have you, but I don't really experience them, and I haven't firsthand have not experienced them. Could exist, but there's so many animals around me. I live in the middle of the woods, and who are dying of natural causes or predation or what have you all the time, that my woods would be full of animal ghosts if that were a thing, and they're not. So human beings, maybe because of something, preconcepts about dying, where animals don't have all this conceptual stuff around dying. When they die in a way, usually that is a surprise or a shock. That's the most likely circumstance for somebody to get stuck. They're not expecting to die. So some examples of that are like a violent death, like a murder or a car accident, or something along those lines, or a suicide. Those sorts of things frequently create the conditions for a spirit that gets stuck. It can also happen when somebody dies of a sickness um, in my experience, this is most likely if the death is unexpected, or sometimes, some, not always and not that frequently, but somebody dies in a very confused state, and they can get a little bit lost. Most of the time, though, when people die of natural causes or they've been sick for a really long time, they just cross over. They're kind of prepared that they might be on their way out, and so they'll have some experience where they of travel, even though it's just really not traveling in physical space, but that's what the experience is like. And then they're usually greeted by loved ones or helping spirits or what have you. When spirits get stuck to a location or a person, they're really not supposed to be there, and so we don't like when shamanic people, at least I hope all shamanic people, when we work with stuck spirits, we treat them like we would treat clients. We treat them with compassion, because they're no less human than we are, just because they don't have a body. And so we help them move on. There are other spirits that wind up in the middle world, which is the spiritual overlay of the physical world, that don't belong here, but they don't originate here. And sometimes those spirits have to be helped along as well. We don't ever really try to exorcise spirits unless it's like a last resort, and even then, most shamanic practitioners today don't do actual exorcism because it's dangerous both for the practitioner and the client, and it requires some real specialized training. What we do frequently is like something called depossession, which is working with the spirit as you would work with a client, with compassion, with understanding, with conversation, and helping them to realize that there's a better place for them to be. So, one of the ways that we work with people in death and dying work is to help them to stop becoming so afraid of dying. There's this whole like really big fear of death, particularly in at least in the culture I live in. People are scared of, really really scared of dying. And this isn't to say that we all shouldn't have a survival mechanism where, if I was about to get into a car accident or fall off a cliff or something, that I shouldn't feel physical fear. Self-preservation is one thing, but fear of the afterlife, because we're all going to die, their bodies are all going to die. Fearing the afterlife doesn't make sense. So one of the ways that we work with people frequently is to, if somebody is in the process of dying, they're sick, and they you know that they have a certain length of time, or that the prognosis isn't great, we will work with people and help to show them that the other side is not a threatening place or horrible place. And that really will frequently ease the transition and make people go through the dying process better. And for me, I don't do a lot of this work, but that really is a beautiful thing, and it's really a beautiful gift that you can give to somebody. From a shamanic perspective, death is not the end. It's not the end. It sounds strange, but it's not the end of your life. It's the end of your physical body's life. Your soul, your soul body continues on, goes to a beautiful place, and you can ease that transition so there's less trauma carried over. Now, a good portion of the trauma will get stripped away in the afterlife, but we will, when we reincarnate, sometimes carry some of that with us, in order to heal it, in order to learn from it, in order to have an experience of that again. We will sometimes recreate that. We can see that in life. Our spiritual life mimics our physical life in some ways, in that you'll see people recreate traumatic relationships over and over and over again, because they haven't healed from it yet. So we try to do some healing and gentle work with people who are in the process of leaving their bodies, or in the process of dying, and really ease that transition. There's lots of work that we can do with somebody. So, so to sort of boil it down from a shamanic perspective, what happens after you die, is shaped a lot by your culture. B is not incredibly unpleasant. You're going to some place that is actually okay and kind of wonderful afterwards. Um, you know, your life, your physical life is precious. You should take care of it. You should take care of your body. You have things to do here that you can't do outside of the body. And there are learnings that you can do here that you can't do outside of the body. But when you go, it's not a terrible place that you're going to. And I'm sorry if that flies in the face of your previously held beliefs. But when we do work, when we do training, when we learn to do psychopomp work, we actually get to experience what life is like on the other side. And I have never experienced anything unpleasant there. I hope that's helpful. I hope that you learned something. I hope you'll subscribe to my channel, and I hope that you stay happy and healthy. I'm going to talk to you real soon.